So many of you here know that I was a visual artist and still am a visual artist. When I first got that little Sony PC-1 camera, it was kind of almost like an extension of my body, and it was a time period in my life where wonderful things were happening and big changes, and I just started using this camera kind of almost like a visual journal. And so I was filming long before events began to happen in my family. And once their illnesses came, I just kept filming. Quite honestly, I never expected anybody to see that footage. That was very much something I was gathering from my own personal kind of way of holding on. And the nature footage was a sort of visual meditation to kind of coping mechanism in a way of really examining what was happening in my yard at the same time. So it wasn't actually until about 5 years later when I had all these tapes in a box, and the box was like yelling at me from the corner, "Deal with me!" And I felt like as an artist, I needed to really unpack that box before I could move on. And so I went to a residency at Yaddo for a couple weeks and just watched all the tapes. And by the end of those 10 days or 2 weeks, I knew, all right, this really needs to be a film. And now I have to learn how to make a film. Documentary feature length was not in my repertoire. And so I spent about 5 years with the fine help of these wonderful ladies, editing this and making it into a documentary. And Lori, and I gotta come a little closer here. Lori and Mary both came in towards the end of the project and really helped me to kind of fine-tune it. And they're kind of also the veteran professionals in the film world and have kind of held my hand a little bit through this. And I'd love to take questions from the audience, if anybody has.
Oh
yeah.
I love, so for me, it's always a little bit intimidating working with someone from the fine art world because the discipline is very different in a way. And it's very, the formal nature of how you made this film, I just wanted to keep you on the track because you had it. But the communication to audience, we're always so aware of that, and I feel like this film, it's so intense, it can shut people out, but I feel like we kind of married keeping to the form, but keeping people in the loop, to keep them engaged and able to go forward with the film. But I felt the strength of vision is from your fine art background, but it's always a difficult or a challenging mix, people launching into this, but I felt like you did very well and very personally led us into something very deep. So thank you, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that Lori came on as an additional editor and I was the producer. And we've worked together before on a film which was somewhat similar about a personal documentary, and one of the characters had a terminal illness and ended up dying. So I think one thing the filmmaker struggles with, such an intimate personal film, and towards the end, it's like they really need someone to come in and be their eyes to the outside world. So Amy, when I came on about a year before it was done, it was just a very beautiful film, and then Lori came in and we didn't really, it was already there, but we just wanted to make it accessible to the audience because it's such a personal documentary. But yeah, the nature and the fine art really enhanced the film more than our other film.
Thank you.
beautiful film, Amy. It's the first time I've seen it since over 2 years ago when I was helping you with it. But I just noticed there's so much beautiful sense of restraint and what you took out. And I was just wondering maybe how all three of you sort of arrived at this point, because it went through so many permutations. How did you come to that distillation?
Well, it was definitely a matter of paring down and trying to find what things really served the message of the film. And we sat together towards the end of the process and actually did some paper edits, really, or just talking through scene by scene, like, do we need this? What's it serving? What's it doing? And then I also had some strict guidelines for myself for the film in general, and that was the guiding principle for the form, and it included that the footage could only be from that time period, that I would not use voiceover, that I would only use material from that time period, which when I found the telephone answering machine tapes, literally 2 years in to the process, I was, I'd forgotten I had them. So that was like, oh my gosh, wow, this is what is going to really work to narrate the story. And I also had the boundary that it needed, or rule, that only my immediate family could be in the film. And so with certain kind of guiding principles. And also we really tried to remain true to the actual way that the story unfolded. And so even though it may seem like a metaphor that the bird was trapped in the house or the hot air balloon was there after my brother died, it's actually true. Those events really happened, like, 5 minutes after my dad called, the bird was trapped in the house. And so it was really about artistic vision, but remaining true to the documentary story. Did you guys want to add anything to that?
In editing, I think just in terms of like coming in towards the end, for me it's always a jigsaw puzzle, these films, and when you come in towards the end though, it's like everything's kind of built to a certain extent, and it's about, like, for me, I remember a lot of the stuff with the nature, the logic of nature. It was like there were places where it had too much breath, had too much time, and so we tried to create like all of the roads leading to Rome, kind of, and it's a process, but it was like just perfecting that language, that each strand of language was arriving and departing just had the right timing, and it's a challenge, but it's kind of like the orchestra's all tuned up, and now you get to conduct, right?
What would you say the overall message of the film is? First of all, I really like it. I got a lot of Terrence Malick. Those really nice shots and the music. I don't know if that was your inspiration or not, but what would you say your inspiration was, and what do you think the overall message of the film is for whoever's watching it?
Well, I very much needed to find the instructions on parting. That's one reason why I named it that. And it was a process for me. The making of the film was a process. And to find my own way of parting through the material, which actually editing was very joyful, so I could be with my family again. And I hope that the message is different for each person. I don't have one central message. I feel like it's a universal story. It's not necessarily a character-driven story. I wanted to keep it very open to let my family almost be a stand-in for people who are experiencing grief and loss and illness. So I didn't intentionally talk about my family members' jobs or go into kind of who they are specifically. And so So it's important for anybody who sees it to be able to, I think, also relate their own personal narrative to this film. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, hi, I have to stand and talk. This is an extraordinary film.
Thank you.
What I want to do is just to tell you some of my responses. I actually don't have any questions, but as a filmmaker, this is extraordinary. You've done an exceptional job. It's very powerful. You are doing what David Mamet talked about, telling a story in shots. It's the shot that it's the continuation of the shots that tells the story. For me, there are a lot of metaphors in this story. The metaphors are so poignant. For instance, there's the closing of a door in the beginning. The pictures are on maybe a fireplace or low appearing table. A glass door closes. There's the Christmas trees burning. That's a very powerful metaphor. That tells a story right there. The other things that come to mind are the tree being dismantled, being cut down. That was very powerful. The way that you use stop motion, or whatever you want to call it, how you speed things up, is another thing that has power for me. Some other shots were the baby's hand against, I guess, her sister's hand against the black cloth, and it was turning. The baby's hand was turning around, and your sister's hand was just there. That was a very powerful. I mean, that's so much about life and death. For me, there were so many shots in here through metaphor that were about life and death, and I found that to be a constant theme: life and death. There was one scene where your sister was sleeping, and the baby was curled around the baby, and the baby was snugged up against your sister's head. I mean, again, that's like life and death for me. It just came through so strong. So you're a storyteller, and you're doing it with film. You're doing it with metaphor, and you're doing it with shots. I'm a filmmaker, and this is the kind of film I wish I could make. Through metaphor and shots, but I guess we each find our own level of filmmaking, of editing, of putting a story together. I have found mine, but I keep searching for the way that you're doing it. And I honestly don't think I find it, because it's a gift. We each have a different kind of gift, and you have that gift. And I wish I had that. I'm not envious of you, but I wish I had that. So this is extraordinary. The editing was just incredible. Your shots, the choice of shots, what you shot, your shot, what you chose to shoot, and then how you pace that throughout the film. But it's what you chose to shoot is incredible. Your eye, in nature, everything was so poignant. So you find the shot, you find the frame, and you shoot it. And, you're very gifted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this film.
That's a true compliment. I really appreciate it. I don't know, do we have time for one more, or how are we doing here?
I think that's probably going to be.
Okay. Yes, well, listen, you guys have been amazing. Thank you. Oh, one more? We do? I don't know if anybody has another question. Anybody have something that they'd like to ask quickly? Yeah. We have two hands up, but go ahead and ask the question.
Well, there were so, well, it was beautiful, and some of the shots or the parts of films looked as if you knew that you were going to use it in the future. But you told us that you were just taking the films, right?
The family footage, yes.
Yeah.
And I will say, which I did not say before, because I'm a visual artist and I used video and sculpture and multi-channel in my past, what I thought was my art at the time was those black background footage with my family's bodies and my hands. That was very much in keeping with the style that I had worked for like 20 years with black background and very like kind of in the studio. And my family had allowed me to film them that way, very graciously. And I was thinking, okay, well, this is my art. But when everything was said and done and all the events unfolded, I looked at those and I thought, there's no way I could show these in a commercial gallery setting in Chelsea as a triptych or something. It was just like, what happened in my family cannot be distilled to just these moments. And so I put them in the box. And I kind of thought I'd failed, quite honestly. And then it wasn't until 5 or 6 years later when I unpacked the box and I saw everything else I'd been doing at the same time with the documentary, documenting my family and the nature. And then it was all of a sudden these 3 strains that could be woven together to really tell the story that I needed to tell. And so it was kind of a revelation at that point.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, sorry. So my question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
So when you thought about making the movie,
Mm-hmm.
and did you have a specific idea that what you wanted to create, and then how is it different from the outcome?
I knew that I wanted to share this very powerful footage. I had really no idea how I wanted to do that, but I think because I was had a strong visual background and originating in photography, and so I had to just trust my intuition moving through. And I did not have a very specific vision in the beginning. But as we were moving through and as I was looking at all the footage, creating those rules I talked about earlier, and kind of simplifying and distilling, and because the story could have gone in so many directions. And so I think ultimately what I wanted to do was create something that would help people. Because we don't talk about death in our society. But we all die, and we all have people in our families who die. And so I think my ultimate goal, which I still am not sure I've achieved, but is to make something that opens this conversation, that gets us talking, that gets us sharing our own experiences, and ultimately, hopefully, helps people. And so that's what I hope that we've done.
Good instruction.
Thank you.
Good instruction.
Thank you. You guys are awesome
What's
for
the
being
next
here.
project?
Well, thank you for asking that too. That's a tricky one and interesting, but Audrey is now Adam, and my 15-year-old wonderful transgender son, and we're working on a co-directing, and it will be another long-term project. I'm clearly comfortable with that long-term trajectory idea, so the two of us are in discussion now. He's a musician, he's a great kid, he's a freshman in high school, so we don't have a very specific plan at this point. We have a very general plan, but we're interested in telling Adam's story, but it's his story too, and so I feel very strongly that he needs to be able to guide that and have an equal hand in it. So that's our plan. Lori has very graciously opened her loft, so we will be gathering at her place a few blocks down afterwards to continue the conversation. Also, I'll meet with people in the bar for a few minutes, so if you have further questions, I'd love to talk to you guys, and Lori can share her address, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Woo!